let's get started. Other people can start trickling in still, but welcome everyone to our Lightning Insights Masterclass on research methods for product managers. We've got a super exciting session planned. I'm Renee, I manage our virtual events here at Dovetail. And we've also got Pat from Dovetail as well, who's going to be sending resources and links on the chat. And he's also going to be capturing all your questions, which we're going to get to at the end. We love questions, so feel free to drop them in the chat as we go. And anything that we don't get to, we'd love to continue the conversation over on our Slack community afterwards, which Pat will send a link to now. So first, let's say hi to our two speakers. Nikki is an experienced research educator. She's delivered training to more than 12,000 students through User Research Academy. And Curtis was a senior product manager at HelloFresh and is currently a director of product at Delivery Hero. And he's also, I hear, an amazing product coach. And fun fact, these two people are actually married and they are, I hear, the product power couple. And for any Modern Family fans here, they would describe themselves as the dynamic duo of Claire and Phil. So what are we going to go through today? Nikki is first going to take us through lightning synthesis and how to lean out your research analysis. And then Curtis is going to take that and then show you tangibly how he gets more out of research as a very time-poor product manager. So without further ado, let's kick off.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Renee. Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. I know a few people messaged me saying hi, and that they were excited to come. So thank you so much for coming. Really pumped to talk about some lean synthesis. I feel like it's like all the buzzwords at once. So in this talk today, what we're going to cover is first, what is synthesis and analysis, because that's always a good starting point. How to streamline your synthesis, some ways to avoid confirmation bias, and kind of like how to create on-the-go insights. I might be switching my screens back and forth a little bit, so just bear with me here as I do that. But I also want to show you all some of the things that I'm talking about as I talk through them. So as Renee mentioned, I'm Nikki. Most importantly, that's Poncho. And as she said, I've been a user researcher for quite some time. I think it's actually like 9 years now. So it's getting up there in those years. I love Pokemon and World of Warcraft. Huge fan of Pokemon. I have them like hanging everywhere, like photos of Pokemon in the house, as Curtis knows. I write psychological thrillers in my spare time, just because it's cool. And then some of my favorite sports are tennis, archery, and fencing. So like archery and fencing, I guess, are like old school in a way. Tennis, not so much. But yeah, and then as Renee mentioned, we live on a small island off the coast of France. It's called Jersey. It's part of the UK. Google Jersey cows. They are so super cute. Whoever said that their favorite food would be cow, maybe might rethink that after seeing the Jersey cows. No, I'm just kidding, because I love it too. Okay, so cool. In the chat, because I like to start with something engaging, can you write how you feel? How do you feel about synthesis? And since I'm a researcher, I'm all about the feels. I love hearing about people's feelings. So I would love to hear how you feel about synthesis. And maybe you can find some commonalities in between you and other people so that you can synthesize your own comments. Okay, so let's get started. As I mentioned, we are going to start with kind of understanding what synthesis and analysis is. So how I define synthesis and analysis is making sense of user research by bringing it together and finding common patterns and trends across the research. And the whole point of synthesis is that it enables a team to take action, right? So if we have a bunch of data, so let's say we have like 7, 10, 12, 15 qualitative interviews, if you dump that on a team, they're not really going to be able to do much with it. So the entire point of synthesis is creating like these small insights, which we'll get to later, that help people make decisions, help people figure out how to improve products. They help innovation, right? So they help us know what to create next. So again, it all goes back to enabling a team to take action. The only problem is in our ideal world, we should spend double the amount of time of a session on synthesis. So a 1 hour interview means that you should be doing 2 hours of synthesis. So if we took a generative research study, which is typically speaking around 12 to 15 interviews, 1-hour interviews, you're looking at 24 to 30 hours of synthesis. And there's a lot of steps involved, right? So we have a lot of different steps that go into this ideal synthesis process. And that does not make it feel lean in the slightest, which is why it is tempting, to say the least, to skip synthesis. But what happens if we do that? So if we decide to skip synthesis and we just do the interviews, what can happen is that information, and I'm speaking as a researcher who has done hundreds and hundreds of interviews before, that information can become very muddled in my brain. And sometimes, especially if you're juggling multiple studies at once, some studies kind of like merge into other studies. And then you're like, was that from this prototype or that prototype? So it can lead to really unclear results. It's also, if we skip synthesis, you're highly likely to be under the influence of confirmation bias, which is when you pick out things that you wanted to hear that confirm your hypotheses and that feel good, and you ignore all the other crappy stuff that's actually quite helpful in improving your product. And again, looking at just even 5 interviews, there can be a lack of action if you skip synthesis, because you're kind of just sitting there like, okay, what did we hear from these 5 people? And oh, we don't want to synthesize, let's just move forward, right? You pick out those things that you did hear that might not have actually been consistent across your participants, which means you can build the wrong thing and ignore research. And to be completely honest, and this might be a little bit harsh, but if you skip synthesis, I would question, why do the research, right? So the synthesis part is that I hate this phrase of actionable insights, but it is the thing that puts research into action, right? So what I want to do is I want to strip down those 24 to 30 hours of synthesis time that I know nobody wants to spend, except for me, maybe. I love synthesis. So, but I want to introduce something called lightning synthesis to you. And the benefits of doing lightning synthesis is that although it's less time, you spend less time doing synthesis, you still are able to understand the problem rather than going off your confirmation bias, even if it's unconscious and you're not meaning to do that. You look at the problem rather than your assumptions. And what's really great about lightning synthesis is you can pull other people into this process, which means that you're collaborating and communicating with them on the go. Again, which also means that you're sharing this knowledge much more efficiently than if you were to wait after 7 sessions, do the synthesis at the end alone, potentially, because nobody else wants to join your full day workshop of synthesis, and then you have to share it back. So if you do this lightning synthesis with a team of people, what happens is you share knowledge on the go, which makes it a lot easier at the end of the study to dive right into the action. And finally, gaining buy-in from others. I don't know if you've ever tried to explain how great something is, kind of like what I'm doing right now, instead of showing people. But if you include them in this short synthesis session, what can happen is it's easier for them to feel the impact and see the benefits of it if they're part of it. So including people in these short little synthesis rounds can help you gain buy-in for either more research or for more synthesis. So there are quite a few benefits to this lightning synthesis. And then as well, what you can do with it, and what I have used lightning synthesis in the past, and I have used it as a full-blown user researcher. I have used this before because I've also been very time poor. And so what can happen is you might not need to create a formal report. So what I did is I did lightning synthesis on a Miro board, and I'm going to show you my template in just 1 second so I can explain a little bit more what that looks like. But I ended up presenting insights directly from that board. So we synthesized as we went, and then at the end, I was able to just go right in and just present from there because everybody had already been a part of it. So I didn't have to spend time on a report. And then with this particular type of synthesis, you highlight things that are helpful for your team, helpful in making better decisions. So pain points, needs, and quick fixes. And these things create a sense of action and urgency, which leads to the next steps. So those are all the benefits and kind of you can avoid certain things that tend to take a lot of time. I know report writing can take a lot of time. I know getting from like the synthesis to the action can take some time as people have to digest information, but lightning synthesis can kind of speed up that process and make it more efficient. So what is lightning synthesis when we look at it? And I know that there are like quite a few steps here, but I promise that there are fewer steps than in that slide before, which had like, I don't know, 10 or 11 steps. So I have tried to half it as best as I can. The reason that I'm saying you don't ever have to do synthesis is because it is necessary. But I am trying my best to help you understand how to kind of lean that out. And the first thing that we start with is gathering all your data. And that can take several forms. So it can be notes from a research session. It's best if it's like session recordings or transcripts. When you gather all these notes, it's super helpful in having them to refer back to during the lightning synthesis. And just a tip that I have, if you're using a software or some sort of recording device that allows you to timestamp recordings, do that for like highlight reels or quotes. It makes it easier to pull them out later. And what I mean by highlight reels are like little clips that you can create that show people, generally speaking, having a really hard time doing something. So rage clicking is a great highlight reel, or people failing to complete a task. So if you mark down timestamps on those recordings, it can also make it more efficient for you when you're pulling out additional data. And then we are going to create global tags. Tags are the things that help us organize the data. If we just looked at all of those notes as they were, they might be a little bit scary. Global tags are the first step to creating your lightning synthesis session. And first, I'm just going to do a quick why should you tag slide, because it's important to talk through this. Tagging brings order to chaos. Right? So when you choose to kind of organize and synthesize and structure your data, the best way to do that is by using tags, right? Because again, that helps show concrete evidence of pain points, needs, and quick fixes. And it inspires action and helps you identify bigger trends. So if you say that something is a pain point, right, and you hear that same pain point over and over again, you can start to say, hey, that's a trend in our data, right? And the tags that I'm going to share with you are the ones that I use specifically for lightning synthesis. And I will explain again in just a minute what that looks like and how we bring this all together. The cool thing about global tags is you can use them across all your projects, so you don't need to think about new tags and new tagging taxonomies after every project or for every project. What you can do is use these lean global tags across all of your projects, so it makes it a little bit easier for you. So these are the lean global tags that I tend to use. I pick 4 at a time. I added on 5 because I thought maybe that would be interesting for you, just to have an extra one in case you wanted to focus on something else. But these are the most common lean global tags that I use. So when we look at these, a goal is something that somebody is trying to accomplish. So as a goal, I want to run a 5K, right? So that's my goal. My goal is to run a 5K by like the end of, I don't know, the summer. Give myself a lot of time. A need is something that I need to fulfill a goal, right? So I need shoes. I need running shoes to get me through these horrendous runs. I might need a water bottle, I might need a training program. So these are all the things that I need to accomplish a goal. And a pain point is a barrier or something that's difficult. And it it's like an obstacle for me trying to accomplish this goal. So a pain point could be something like, I can't run without losing my breath. Or I get like muscle cramps, or I get, blisters and or I don't know how, should I run in intervals or not, right? And then a tool is something that people can use to try and accomplish a goal. So this could be anything from like a physical object. So like shoes are technically a tool that we use, but it could be digital as well. So like Couch to 5K is like a super popular app that teaches you literally how to get off your couch and train for a 5K. But always keep in mind that tools don't always have to be digital. You could be looking at a pen and paper as a way. Actually, when I used to go to the gym and do bodybuilding, I used pen and paper to track my progress. So tools aren't always digital, keep that in mind. And then finally, a quick fix is something that's painful or annoying for people that can easily be fixed within the context, generally speaking, of a product or your product. The Dovetail team is going to make a small kind of like handout for you with these lean global tags, so you can look forward to that as well. Cool. So what do we do with these global tags? Why am I lecturing you on these horrendously awful things? So what happens is you tag each session, ideally right after, and this is where we dive into what a lightning session actually looks like. Right? So as a user researcher, what I do is when I invite stakeholders to research, I add on 20 to 30 minutes after a session. And so this is baked into the calendar invite. So let's say we have an hour session, I invite them for an hour and a half calendar block. And so what we do is right after that session, we take 20 to 30 minutes to tag the session, to synthesize the session in a very efficient way. Right? So this is where lightning synthesis kind of comes into play right after the session. And I do stress that it is really important to do this right after the session because that is when the information is super fresh for you and you can like really get it done really quickly. Trust me, I have done it where I've tried to do it the next day. I've tried to do it at the end of the day, which is just a nightmare. So always try and take the 20 to 30 minutes after the session to do this. So how to run a lightning synthesis session. You create a board or you can use my template, which you will get access to. And I'm just going to pop in here because this makes it a lot easier for me to explain rather than telling you what this is. So if you see this board, and again, you will get access to this as a resource. If you see this lightning synthesis board, you'll see that I picked 4 quadrants over here, and these directly line up with the global tags that I was thinking about. So I picked goals, pain points, needs, and quick fixes, right? And so within this time, within this 20 to 30 minute window, after the session, we go to this board and we're like, okay, for each quadrant, we're going to spend a few minutes. It's both divergent and convergent work, which is fantastic for synthesis. Divergent being things that you do on your own, and convergent being like discussions that you come together and discuss something. So for a few minutes, everybody writes down on their own all the goals that they can think about from that session. Then the next few minutes, you discuss the goals and you cluster the similar ones that came up. Then you move on to pain points and you do the same thing. Needs, the same thing. Quick fixes, the same thing, right? So what you're doing is after each session, you're getting down the most important information right away, okay? And the reason that this is so efficient is when you wait after 7 sessions, if you do the synthesis right after the 7th session, you might have a really great memory of the 6th and the 7th session, but then like the 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st kind of all like mush into each other. And it's harder for you to like pick out information. So what this does is this allows you like a really fresh take on the session and gets all that information out. So you do this for each participant. And you'll see here that I also have an area for insights. I also have an area for assumptions and biases. And I also have an area for action items. I will talk about insights and biases in just one moment, but I just want to highlight this action items area. It's super important because what you can do is right after that synthesis session, the lightning synthesis, within it, you can start to assign actions and come up with some things that you can do. So that's what I'm trying to stress is like be as action oriented as possible. Okay. I am going to dive back in to this. So great. And this is a sample agenda, but again, you will get the resources and you will be able to see the actual template. So as I mentioned, lightning synthesis is all about efficiency. So it allows you to pull patterns really quickly and write insights as you go. So, and everybody's like, what's a pattern? I always think of a pattern as like a trend of 3 or more people. So if like 3 or more people like said the same thing. So let's take that running example. So let's say 3 or more people were like, I don't even know where to get started. Right? that becomes a trend when you start to hear that, or a pattern or a trend. They're very interchangeable when you start to hear that from 3 or more people. So that's why this like lightning synthesis is so great, because like after like, as I'm going to say, after just 3 participants, you can start seeing patterns and creating insights. And just before we get into writing insights really quickly, I just wanted to find what an insight is, because I feel like this is like full of buzzwords today, like synthesis, analysis, lean, insight. And insight is something that makes us go like, oh, wow, like Owen Wilson, wow, wow, wow. That's like an insight, right? And it pushes us to challenge something that we previously believed, or it like disproves something that we believed. Right? So it's something that is like really surprising. And that's like, oh, wow, I had no idea that that's how somebody thought. Of course, like insights can validate our hypotheses. But generally speaking, like insights are really like about the underlying motivations behind why people are thinking or feeling or saying what they are. So how do you create these insights on the go, right? So as I mentioned, you can start creating these insights as you go through these like lightning synthesis sessions. So I just want to quickly talk about the 3 components, and like in all of my other slides and like presentations and articles, like there are like 6 or 7 components of an insight. So I'm also trying to lean out insights for you into 3 different steps and 3 different components. So a key learning. So that's what the like attitude or behavior is that you kind of learned, or the problem. The why, so why people are feeling or thinking a certain thing, or why people are encountering this problem. And then the consequence. This is the most important thing. And I see like researchers forgetting about the consequence all the time. The consequence is like the so what, like what's the impact of this insight. So for instance, let's say that I was using the Couch to 5K program for training for a marathon, a 5K. So in that, like, let's say that like between week 3 and 4, like there's like a major jump, right? So like I go from like running and walking, and suddenly I'm like running a lot more, and I'm feeling very like it's kind of like shattered my confidence. I'm like, oh, I'm clearly not doing something right. I'm feeling really bad about this. A lot of people will like leave the insight there. Like they'll be like, oh, the jump between week 3 and 4 was like really tough for the user, right? But what's the next step? Okay, like what's the so what? You know, what does that mean? What could that lead to? And generally speaking, it's like, what happens if you don't act on this insight? Like what happens for the participant, your organization, your product, right? So if I'm feeling a lack of confidence in myself, what might happen, especially if you don't say to me in the beginning, a lot of people experience difficulty between week 3 and 4, you know, like if you don't say anything like that in your product, what could happen is I could actually go and be like, this is a frustrating experience. I'm going to go to a different training program. So that is the consequence, right? So it's not just that the user is frustrated and feeling like less confident. They could leave the product, right? So I just wanted to say that really, really quickly in terms of insights. And then right before I get to confirmation bias, and that's the last part, I promise, I'm almost done. So what happens is when you're going through that board, when you're creating these insights, I usually start to create insights after the 3rd interview. So let's say that I'm interviewing 7 people. I will start to create insights after the 3rd person, because I start identifying patterns. So again, if 3 or more people are saying that same thing, week 3 to 4 is a really big jump. I don't really have any confidence anymore. That then becomes our pattern, and we can write that as an insight, right? After the 3rd participant. So once you start seeing those patterns on the go, you can start writing these insights as you go. And by the end, you'll have like a load of really awesome insights. And you won't have to do like a super long synthesis session at the end. So this is really about increasing your efficiency in terms of like gathering that data, tagging that data, seeing those patterns early on, and then being able to write insights like as you're going through the data. So you might have quite a few, let's say you're interviewing 12 people, you might have quite a few insights even by the time you get to like the 6th or 7th person. So that's really, really cool. And then you can build on those insights further if you hear more people saying it. So I just want to say, if you're doing this synthesis, any kind of synthesis, but this kind of synthesis because it's more quick, be careful of confirmation bias. And as I mentioned, this is like choosing, like we generally speaking unconsciously do it. I've done it before, but we're picking out things that we want to hear, like, oh, that validates our hypothesis, or like, oh, they said that they loved this. And we can kind of like ignore some of the more important feedback. And what that can do is that can lead to really poor decision making. So instead of listening to like what actually went wrong, so that you can fix the user experience or that you can create better features, you're kind of like, oh, this person loved this. And then you're like continuing to create something that's like based off of that, which like one person loved and nobody else did. So it just leads to poor decision making. So as I mentioned on that lightning synthesis board, I had like an assumptions and biases section. And in that, so before each session, I just like brain dump some like assumptions or biases I might have about the session coming up. And that just gets it out of your brain. So you don't need to worry about it. And while you're synthesizing, you could be like, are we like using confirmation bias here? Like, are we like playing up our assumptions because they're right on the board with you? You can also include others, like synthesizing in a vacuum on your own. It has to happen sometimes, but including others helps them review your insights, review what you're saying, and maybe challenge them, right? So those are some really great ways that you can kind of like avoid confirmation bias. If you are doing it on your own and you don't have a chance to like bring anybody else in, which you can do this whole process on your own. Just assess the risk if you are wrong. So assess the risk if you are using confirmation bias or like falling into that kind of pattern or falling into your assumptions and biases. And what I mean by assess the risk is like, really like take your findings, like the information that you put into those little quadrants, and say, look at your assumptions and say, hey, is there anything that's going on between the two, you know? So instead of 24 to 30 hours, and I did the math, it's 6 to 7 hours. So I didn't erase synthesis for you. But what I did is I greatly reduced the amount of effort and time that you need to put into your synthesis if you do this on the go. So after every session, you're tagging the session, you are starting to write insights after the third person, and you're really going, so that at the end, you've already done the work. It's like the opposite of delayed gratification. It's like really being on top of it. And I promise, like, it might seem like, oh, like an extra 20 to 30 minutes, that's so annoying. But trust me, if you're sifting through like even just 7 sessions, it's going to take you a really long time, because you're going to have to remember things. You're going to have to go through things again. And instead, what you're doing is you're really just like downloading the information right away so that it is accessible to you, accessible to others, and inspiring people to take action. Oh, thank you. I hope that was helpful for at least some of you. There are a bunch of ways that you can reach out to me and connect with me. And I would love to hear about how this goes for you. As I mentioned, you're going to get a bunch of these resources. I have a bunch here for you. So you're going to get a bunch of these resources after this talk. And I hope that they are helpful for you in really getting you started and kind of helping you with making your synthesis more efficient. But thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And now I am going to give my wonderful husband access to screen sharing. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Cool. Oh, now I can see all of you. We're on the chat. Cool. Curtis, you're muted. It's like, I can hear you.
So after 2 years of COVID, would have been there, but we're clearly not. And so, okay, after 2 years of COVID, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, awesome. So hi everyone. Thanks, Nikki, for that. I think it's a nice lead in, and it's always nice to balance user research and product management. So hopefully I can give you a different side of this now. So today I want to talk to you a little bit more about getting more from user research for time for product managers. And I can fully empathize with this because I spent a lot of my career as feeling like a time poor product manager. Before we go into it, I want to tell you a little bit about me. So I love board games, running, and rugby. I've got 2 cats and a dog, and I think some of you saw my cats appear on the camera during Nikki's presentation. And as we said at the opening of this, any dish from my perspective with fried halloumi is going to be a winner. and then at the bottom are some of the companies I've worked with in the past. Before we go in as well, just on Delivery Hero, because a lot of people haven't heard of Delivery Hero per se. It's a portfolio company and it operates different local brands all around the world. So the brands you may have heard of, it's Payer, eFood, Talabat, Food Panda, to name but a few. So today, to talk to you a little bit more about our agenda, I want to talk a little bit about lean in the context of user research, really to kind of build on that lightning synthesis concept that Nikki was talking about. Some of the most overlooked opportunities I have tended to find as a product manager of what I've done, and also what I see in our community of an overlooked opportunity. And then I want to also give you kind of 4 methodologies I've done to try and get a little bit more leanness in the way that we've done user research in the past. Some will work, some won't, but hopefully it'll just give you some things you can add to your toolbox. So I kind of want to title this first section, Setting Ourselves Up for Success. And what do I mean by that? I think the first thing to say here is like we often hear about like lean and lean discovery and lean delivery. And I think often we translate lean to meaning lightweight, something I can do quick and easily. And sometimes it is, sometimes that is part of it. But I also think that this definition, and full disclosure, I stole this definition from Marty Kagan, but lean is fundamentally about tackling risks early, designing collaboratively and not sequentially. And I'll explain more about why I think that's so important in a moment, and then just solving problems and not just shipping features. So I just want to keep that idea of, lean not just being lightweight, but having a kind of a more overarching vision behind it as we go through this. So I've always thought of product development as about building the right things fast. Now, I feel like that's one of those things. It's a very simple statement, which masks a lot of complexity, right? How do you decide what are the right things? And how do we move fast against them as a product development team? And for me, this has always been kind of the key question, right? You can optimize for, let's say, speed or quality. And how do we as a product development team, how do we optimize for both? And I think one of the most overlooked things, and I say this as someone that was guilty of this for a large part of my career, one of the most overlooked things is not involving enough of the team in the process of discovery. And I'm going to go out there and say you'll be leaner as a team if you involve everyone in the discovery process. And I want to talk a little bit more about why that was my key learning, kind of like the moments that I've had that have kind of got me to this conclusion. So the headline of this talk was kind of getting more from user research for time poor product managers. And then my question, I guess, to us is like, why are we time poor? What is it about the way that we're working that makes us feel time poor, and that we have to look for the lightweight opportunities and those quick responsive to things? And generally, in my experience, it's because we've built ourselves into a bottleneck situation. Often with a focal point for the team, and it feels like lots of things have to travel through us for our input, our advice, or in some cases our approval. And sometimes that's okay. Like sometimes that's absolutely part of our job. I'm not trying to say that teams shouldn't have product managers or product owners, but often I think we over-index. And a lot of the community, a lot of the conversation in the community and historically has been about protect the team, protect their capacity, protect their focus. And I think it's true, and it comes from a good place. But what I think is lots of the times that we over-index too far, and what we go from protecting the team and protecting their ability to focus to siloing the team and keeping them away from the context of why we're building things and what we're building them for. And then the problem with the product manager bottleneck is ultimately it's going to slow down the team's pace of delivery of value. And I'll explain a little bit more about why I think that's the case in a moment. Fundamentally undermines the autonomy of the team. I would tend to find that most of the colleagues that I work with, be they developers, be they analysts, be designers, be they QA, be they my business partners, they're not just there to build the things we tell them or do the analysis. Like they're very clever individuals and have a stake and interest in what we're doing, and giving them the context, particularly to help make informed decisions, both in terms of what we build and how we build it. I think that's really key. And I think the product manager bottleneck is a really undermining factor to that. And so this is a visual that you may have seen before. It comes via John Cutler, who I'm a huge fan of, and the Amplitude organization. And he has this visualization of the product development process. And he kind of simplifies it quite a lot and says, listen, it goes all the way through from opportunity selection through to running the thing in production. And he says, there's this evolution over time, and the more cross-functional, the more collaborative your workflow is, the healthier you become, until hopefully we reach that ideal state of a product team. Yeah, fully cross-functional. We start work and finish work together, and we reduce those number of handoffs. This is a theme that comes up in quite a few kind of areas, and it's something I've seen in the reality of the situation. Is like every single one of those handovers becomes a pain point for you or the team. And I think when we hand over anything, every time we do that, we lose some part of context. We lose some part of the clarity. And kind of tying this back to user research is in various guises is about understanding the context of a problem or the context of a solution, right? And every time that we filter that out or it passes through another handoff, we lose some of that context and it diminishes at each step. Okay, and I think this on the right, I found this video on LinkedIn the other day and I thought it was absolutely incredible. And like I've seen this happen, right? We go through different phases, like we expect the user research to go away and get this insights, and they do a synthesis and hand it over to the product manager. The product manager again then obviously misses a lot of the context, passes it over to the developers, and like what we end up shipping, because we're just doing handover between groups of humans, we lose that context. And I tend to find that the more you can do to shorten that, the better. I think the other example, if you've ever as a kid played this game of telephone where someone will tell you something and then they have to tell the next person, and after 5 or 6 loops you find out what message is there, it's normally very different. And I think it's the same in product development. Every step in the process, every time you're taking one step away from the context of what you're trying to solve for, makes it really hard to understand that problem. If you don't understand the problem properly, it's really hard to solve into that problem. So what I want to say here is I think your value as a product manager comes from acting as a knowledge facilitator, not as a knowledge controller. And I don't think people do this maliciously. That's certainly not my belief behind this. But sometimes as product managers, we like to solve problems. And I saw this comment come up in the chat a few times, like, how do you stop product managers jumping straight to the solution or trying to solve every problem? I was like, you don't need to. And this can take us it takes us time to kind of get comfortable with this. But really your job is to create an environment where your team can solve every problem. And that really comes down to context. And sharing this context. So going back to this and kind of what John Cutler was talking about here was by bringing those humans in your team and outside of your team, to be fair, into the process, you're reducing these number of gray arrows, these external handoffs, or even to be fair, internal handoffs, which also introduce this level of friction. But the more you can get everybody in the same page, the more autonomous that they can be, right? And there's another great Marty Kagan quote: if you're just using your engineers to code, you're only getting about half their value. I think this is just as true when we talk about our analytics colleagues, our QA colleagues, our business partners, right? Our stakeholders, if you want to call them that. I tend to find that the more you can bring these humans together in a cohesive nature, that's what a really cross-functional and collaborative team should be. It's not just about having all the humans in terms of all the skills, but it's also about making sure all those skills have the context of the business or customer problems that we're trying to solve. So the product bottleneck, the ideal situation is you want to make sure that your teams have the context by which to make good decisions. So your teams can respond to obstacles, questions, blockers without your input necessarily. And I've seen this a few times. Like we tried really hard at HelloFresh to do this, where those in our team that wanted to be involved in the context and the user research. Sorry, the cat's moving. Oh dear. Sorry about that. Who wanted to be involved in this process could do. And we actually had a very high level of engagement. There were some engineers that were like, no, I just want to code, I want to build some awesome technology. That's fine. But we found that the majority of our colleagues in engineering, design, and our business partners wanted to be involved in this. And I remember a certain situation that came out of this. And so we did continuous discovery in various guises, and then we had different things going on at the same time. And it came to one day, and this designer and a front-end developer said, hey, we remember from some research a while ago that we struggle with customers in terms of how they perceive the pricing of HelloFresh. So people will cancel and sell a discount on their account. So we've decided we want to do this experiment around how we communicate discount pricing related to a different product we were working on at the same time. So they had the core designs and they iterated them on the fly to support this. And to me, if we hadn't involved all these humans in all the different types of research, we wouldn't have had those building blocks. We wouldn't be able to make those connective tissues to operate autonomously. So when I go back to the idea of why are we time-starved PM, it's because people feel that we need to be there to approve because they don't have the context. They don't have enough information to make a decision. And generally speaking, connecting this back to user research, that is so key for building that up. So that's my main thing to you. And these are just some pictures of like workshops that we've done. This was from a lunch, listen and learn. So this was to do with listening to customer cancellation calls at HelloFresh. And so we'd go through, we'd be doing and kind of a little bit to, I think as well, so what came up in some of the chats there was like, as we went through the calls, we would take post-it notes and then we would do groupings after every several calls. And in this room, you've got some backend developers, web developers, product analysts, business partners, stakeholders, product managers from different teams to try and help us with our own team biases. And we did this time and time again in different contexts. Again, these were all kind of lightning synthesis, but what that meant was every single member of that product team, and I'm saying the product team here is a collection of all the humans, not just people with product in that title, they had the context for the problems they were solving. So with that more conceptual starting point, which I hope was interesting, I want to give you some tips for your toolbox and 4 things that I've always found really helpful in a way of just being a bit, going back to the lean comment, in terms of just being lightweight, that helps us de-risking a little bit and move collaboratively. Here are some of kind of my 4 favorite ones that we can do. Okay, so this one is a little bit more heavier. I'll admit this. I start with the heaviest one first, but this is a fascinating approach. So what the store, which basically you give your live product to your customer and you let them walk you through typically how you use it. It's very generative, very open. You're not necessarily asking to do task completion or measure anything like that, but you just want to see and hear about how your customers talk about the product. One of the best things I ever did for this was make sure that the engineers were there. And I remember in one, the customer stumbled across a bug. And the product designer who was conducting the interview at the time was like, "Oh, sorry about that." They refreshed it and it all went normal. But one of the front end developers was in that call, and I looked over. He was taking notes, and he switched over and actually started fixing the bug because he hadn't seen that context, and he built a lot more empathy with the users. So just seeing customers and how they use the product, again, we're closing the number of jumps between the problem space and the context and what they're doing. And I thought that was just a great moment. Also, I think it was Sebastian in the chat that was talking about this in terms of while you're going through these kind of interviews or whatever, about making notes live. We would do that often in a Google document. We'd have 2 or 3 of us going. We'd have a primary note taker who was actually good at it, and then we'd be adding our thoughts as we went along. It wasn't necessarily tagging, but it was definitely adding thoughts in a collaborative way. The second one, everyone kind of likes the idea of this at surface level and then is kind of terrified about it. But this was something that they did at Stripe for a lot of their early years in the organization. So all new joiners were required to spend time doing customer support tickets or working. So they understood their product and they understood the challenges that their users were facing. And then Stripe is an incredibly user-centric company. Taking the time with your team to go away and do customer support tickets will generally build a high degree of empathy with your colleagues in customer support very, very quickly. But it also helps you as a team get closer. And I think I remember for a long time, we always used to have these reports on ticket volume for different, contact reasons. Those contact reasons have a lot more color to them, shall we say, once you've handled the ticket yourself. 10% of customers are canceling because they couldn't manage their subscription or couldn't. When you actually talk to customers, and going back to Nikki's point, you pick out a lot more patterns. And I think there's a degree of empathy there. I'm not saying that you then immediately build a product, you handle 5 tickets and you're going to solve those 5 problems. I'm not saying that. You just have to go away as a group debrief and bring those insights together. But again, it builds a lot of empathy and you can do that. And you're probably thinking, wow, how is handling customer support tickets lean? And again, it comes back to this fundamental principle. It's like, how can you share as much context as possible with your team? How do you shorten those feedback loops between where the problem space is with your users, with your customers, with your business, and to the teams that be able to solve it? So if you're spending less time having to explain this again and again, or represent it or rework because you've not solved the problem, that in itself is a more lean model to approach these. This one is my favorite. For me, it was always phone my mum, particularly when I was at HelloFresh, because my mum was a HelloFresh user. And I would speak to people who use the product and I would send them prototypes and mock-ups, and you get fascinating insights. My favorite one I ever had from my mum was I sent her the mock-up and she asked me a question. She was like, "But I don't understand what that letter Q is for." I was like, what do you mean the letter Q? What are you on about? And what she was talking about the search icon. And it was a search icon that I'm pretty sure everyone in this call can identify the search icon as being a circle with a line in it, right? As it's meant to mean a magnifying glass. My mum thought it was the letter Q. Now, I'm not saying again that every customer would then fall into that trap, but it was an interesting way to do a little more kind of guerrilla type research. So if you're on a smaller team or you don't have dedicated user researchers, you can do these small, more informal things. You need to be conscious that they are informal, and if you've not got a wonderful user researcher that's able there to help you, much like with quantitative data, you can go wrong if you don't know how to use it. With qualitative data, you can as well. But again, this is about building up context and trying to kind of compress those feedback loops that you have as a product team. And then this is one of my favorite ones. Nikki touched on this a little bit. She talked about having these shorter clips. You can do this, if all of your team don't want to necessarily come and do synthesis, as a way to kind of build empathy and shorten those feedback loops. You take those key clips, either from session replays or from user interviews, and you play them back. You watch them as a team. You get some drinks, some beers, or whatever, if you want to, popcorn, and then you can do live synthesis and live analysis together. Again, you can compress a lot of the noise. So if you've got an interview that takes an hour, for example, you can pull out some key things that people are saying, and you can see with your team what you could do to respond to that and how you can move forward. And again, here, the tagging model that Nikki explained earlier on in the session was also just a really great mechanic for this. So I think they're two of my more favorite leaner methods that you can do to do a little bit more light research. But I think if there's one thing you take away from this, I think involving your colleagues a lot more. So you are a lot less of a time-starved PM, because you can delegate these out. Your team is able to operate autonomously without you, and you're able to kind of cut out some of those noise or those middle meetings. It's probably the biggest thing I can advise. And I know for me, it was a big enabler in my career, being able to move faster as a team and as a product manager. It's also, bonus tip for those of you in product and looking to progress in your career, learning those skills early will lend you very well when you're doing the same kind of job in a product leadership role. So that's my tips for you. Thank you. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn if you want to geek out about talking about product stuff. I'm always happy to chat. I also write very occasionally on Medium and post even less occasionally on Twitter. So yeah, I'll leave you with that. If you're only using your engineers to code, you're only getting about half their value.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nikki and Curtis, and really agree with what you said at the end. Like at Dovetail, we really believe in bringing the whole team together to and using or leveraging each other to really empower the research and make it impactful. So I think we've got time for a couple of questions. Let's jump into some. The first question is, I'm happy for either of you to take this, or you can both answer as well. How do you gently remind stakeholders to recognize that they're facing confirmation bias, especially in lightning synthesis? So maybe Nikki, you could take this one.
Yeah, sure. Really great question. So what I would say is, in the lightning synthesis board, I force people right before we do it, or even better, right before the interview, to jot down a few things on what they think that they are assuming about the person, or how that person might use that product, or what they want the person to say, what they wish the person would say. So that is really helpful in getting people to at least put down onto paper, or a virtual paper, what they are thinking in that sense. So that has been helpful for me, because it's the first step is awareness. So it's addressing that elephant in the room and putting that elephant on a piece of paper so that everybody can see it. So I would try and force yourself to get people to write down, wherever it might be, what those assumptions, biases, wants, or desires would be, so that it's out there, so that you can check against it. And it also helps. There's the pink elephant kind of method that you could apply to this. So pink elephant means in a meeting, if somebody's getting off topic, you can say pink elephant, and the topic, everybody goes back to the topic at hand, and you can put that information into a parking lot. You can do the same thing with confirmation bias. If somebody starts saying, oh, well, this person loved it, and you clearly can see that some confirmation bias is creeping in, you can use any type of pineapple or pink elephant or whatever to call out that person is within that confirmation bias, without saying you're being biased, so that might soften it a little bit too.
Yeah, and This is a follow-up question. Do you have any real life examples of biases or assumptions that people have written
Yeah,
down?
sure. So I was working at a social media company a long while back. We had a social media platform. And what happened is the role that we were talking to and we were creating personas. I did like proto personas, so prototypes or skeletons of personas. And what I did is I talked to some of the stakeholders beforehand, before we started doing these interviews, and they were like, yeah, these people like are kind of like fluffy, they're like kind of phony, like they're like lazy, like, so people like were actually open to saying these things. And what happened is in the research we found that they were actually quite stressed, and that's what caused them to try and cut corners. So like, whereas we maybe saw that as like annoying or lazy, what happened is we actually understood that that behavior was due to something else. So that was like a really helpful time where it helped us understand like why people were acting in a certain way in real life versus our assumptions.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And yeah, awareness is like so important. Let's jump to the next question. Maybe Curtis, you can answer this one. Can you speak to the ways you've included data in your lightning synthesis?
So this is funny. Nikki will tell you this. For a very long time, I was a firm believer that quant could answer all of my questions, and qual was just far too fluffy. And you know, why ask 12 people how they feel or how they think about something when I can just run an experiment against a few thousand people and get an actual answer? So I think there's a few ways we've done this. I don't think qual or quant alone will solve your problems. I think there is a symbiotic relationship between the two. And I think with any type of user research, it's always going to be contextualized with quant, right? We've seen this particular issue. So I don't know, we see X percentage of our customer cohort stop before their fourth order. Okay, that's a starting point. And then from the quant side, you can start to dig into understanding, okay, what are the certain types of customers that do that? And that might frame the types of customers you want to do your research on. I'm trying to think of specific examples here, but I don't think they're decoupled. I don't think you have research and over here in qualitative insights and your analysts over here in quant. And that's why whenever we've done any of these sessions, we always involve our quant analyst, or conversely, whenever our quant analysts are presenting insights that they've learned, our user researchers, or the person taking on the role of user researcher. I know not every team has had a user researcher. Often in our case, it was often the product designer that took on that kind of role as well. They're always in. So I think they simply inform each other. Generally speaking, don't try and build products for average customers because the average customer is an amorphous clay blob. At least try to target it. And normally that targeting will come from some kind of quantitative segmentation, I would say.
Yeah, awesome. I think the next question is also for you, Curtis. If you're a PM, who would you typically invite or recommend inviting to the synthesis session? Like the dev team, your UX or UI designer, or maybe even marketing?
Yes. My answer is just yes. I think it's any of these people that are going to have a perspective on this. I almost certainly would say bring your business partners into this. I think anything you can do to build alignment and build trust is a really great thing. Often you make sure that in other conversations, you're not having the same principle, right? We talk about trying to close those loops so you don't have to go and re-explain stuff to developers, so they have the context to make good decisions. Also helps if your business partners have got the same understanding of the context or the problem space or the solution space that you're operating in. It depends on the thing, but I think generally a diverse group is good. In the past, I've always liked to bring in, you probably know if you're product managers, you probably have those other product managers in your organization that you really love geeking out about. Like Marty Kagan posts a new thing on Silicon Valley Product Group and you send each other. So those product managers, I tend to find are really good partners if you want to make sure that you're not stuck in your own problem space bubble with your team or your key business partners. Bringing them in as well, let's just give a different perspective, I think has always been really interesting for me. So my short answer to that is, who would you bring into the group? Bring in a mix of humans. Obviously, I'm not saying bring 50 and that's going to be completely crazy, but if you've got a diverse set of chapters, shall we say, in there, that's great. Also, some people just won't want to be involved, and that's okay, but I think you should give people the option to opt out.
I think that's super applicable here at Dovetail. Like we offer like to everyone in the company to join in on these interviews and stuff, and it's very, very valuable for everyone in the company to build that context around customers, and it impacts us very like deeply. So it's really awesome. Okay, Nikki, I think this one's for you. Do you recommend creating a tagging taxonomy first or creating tags based on the content?
When you don't have a lot of time, that's why I kind of talked about global tags. So those are tags that you can reuse that are agnostic of like products or projects, right? So they can be applicable across many different projects. Like you will always find in research pain points. You will always find needs and goals. So that's why I kind of think when you don't have the time to create this like tagging taxonomy for this project, the global tags are best. Project-based tags are fantastic. I tend to not create them before because I use a method of creating project-based tags as I'm synthesizing because you don't know what will come up in the project before you tag the project. So generally speaking, I will come up with project-based tags as I go through the research. But I think one of the resources that I have in my slide deck talk about global tags versus project tags in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, and we'll be sending these resources to you guys afterwards as well. So I think we have time for one more question. So both of you can answer this. If the people that you bring into the synthesis session weren't in like the previous calls, what's your advice on bringing them up to speed? Let's assume that they aren't going to rewatch the entire call.
Yeah, this happened like literally all the time for me. So I ended up doing a lot of synthesis on my own. But if they weren't in the previous calls, similar to what Curtis was saying, you can have an opt out. Like if they want to join the calls, or if they want to join like the synthesis sessions, moving forward, what I would say is they should review the previous synthesis boards. So if you have synthesized, like done the lightning synthesis where you're tagging each of those sessions, right? What you should do is have them actually look at those boards so that they can kind of get up to speed. Additionally, you can have them review notes or transcripts. If they aren't going to watch the entire video, you can encourage them to watch it at 2x speed, which is what I usually do when I'm synthesizing. Everybody sounds like a chipmunk, but at least it's more efficient. So that's also something that you can try and get them to do. But really reviewing the previous synthesis that has been done can help them get up to speed.
Yeah, those are super helpful tips. All right. So we'll have to wrap up here. Thank you everyone for attending. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. Yeah, but also thank you to our amazing speakers for this super insightful masterclass. Hopefully you all found it helpful and can take away a few actionable things into your roles. Pat is going to send a link to our takeaway, which is the Lean Global Tags for PMs, and also a link to our community. Make sure that you join us on the events channel to continue the conversation. We'd love to hear your feedback there as well. So feel free to drop in what you liked about this session, maybe what we could have improved. And most importantly, we want to know what you guys actually want to hear about next. And then you'll also receive an email tomorrow, depending on what time zone you're in, with a recording of this session if you want to revisit any of these amazing golden nuggets, and you'll also get the slides. But thank you everyone again, and have a lovely rest of the day wherever you are. All right. Bye everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye.